welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be painting this massive miniature, the Sky Lantern from the Grand Cathay range from Warhammer the Old World. Such an awesome model. As soon as I saw it in the preview I just knew we had to paint it, and we're doing something pretty special with this one. So I've part assembled the miniature. Ignore those smoke clouds at the bottom. We actually go in a different direction for the heat a little bit later on. I've built the model in subsections and kept the Sky Lantern separate from the rest of the model. And what we do is, using the airbrush first of all, is we're going to be creating a glowing effect. So the brightest point will be at the bottom of the balloon. The coldest point will be at the top, and to do that we're going to use bright colours at the bottom, darker colours at the top. So to get the brightest colours, we start by just over the black primer using the Vallejo White Ink through the airbrush. It's almost pure white at the bottom of the Sky Lantern, and then we're going to just gradually use the gradient to go from purest white up to the darkest colour to the top, using less and less of the white ink the further up the Sky Lantern we go. So we're covering probably 2/3 with a small section at the bottom with pure white, and then getting less and less white towards the top. It takes a bit of time to do this. I've done airbrushing for a few years. I used to just practice these methods on sort of old rhinos and things, but the idea here is you just do little squirts with the airbrush. You don't hold the gun down for too long, just little squirts with the airbrush, and just use its natural ability to create those gradients for you. You can see I've got the airbrush quite far away from the model so that you're getting a nice dispersal, and you get the more white towards the centre of where you're spraying. So if you're pushing it upwards, the gradient will naturally flow above you to get the desired effect you want. And I cover about half the model with the white ink, and the coverage gets less and less and less. And this is a tough effect to pull off. We're looking to get a glowing effect that looks like it's glowing from inside the Sky Lantern itself, so the heat source is at the bottom going inside like a hot air balloon. So at the end we do use a lot of matte varnishing to try and dull down the brightness that we're creating, and obviously using a lot of dark colours at the top to show that there's no light up there. And also I thought a lot of soot collection could be at the top, where the smoke is billowing out and there'd be soot collected at the top of the lantern. So we've gone for that as well, and I think you'll all agree that it works really well. And actually, once you get these base layers down, this white ink layer down, it's a relatively easy process to do. It's not the hardest process we do with the airbrushing. It's such a large model that there's not much intricate airbrushing here. It's just layers and layers of the fluorescent paints that we generally use. So as you can see there, I've covered quite a lot of the Sky Lantern, but most of the ink is at the bottom, with small parts at the top where it's naturally getting darker towards the top. I sort of used that rope line from the top, the third rope line down, as my barrier. I didn't want any more brightness above that, so it naturally fades to there. Now once we've done the white, we now move on to our brightest colour, which is fluorescent yellow from AK, diluted with a bit of Daler and Rowney fluorescent yellow ink, just so it flows out of the airbrush a bit easier. And now what we do here is we just cover all of the white ink with the fluorescent yellow. Take it easy, it does flow quite easily out of the airbrush. Take your time and just work yourself around and cover all of the white ink with the fluorescent yellow mix. It's it's a 50-50 mix for every drop from your fluorescent orange to ink, so it's a 50-50. Once you've done with the yellow, you then move on to the orange. So this is again a 50-50 mix of AK fluorescent orange and Daler and Rowney fluorescent ink. And now what we're doing is you want to remove that greenish tone that you've got, that it gets created there. So I give the bottom half, this bright point, just a couple of sprays of the orange, not too much, just try and maintain some of that yellow, and then the further up you go, just add more and more orange to the layers, so that the yellow is completely disappeared. So a little bit like the gradients we're producing, you're now creating a gradient with the orange. So but it's the reverse, not as much at the bottom, but full coverage at the top, and you'll go from then fluorescent yellow to fluorescent orange to dark. Again, take your time, a few squirts out of the gun. See, this is a hard model to capture. I'm kind of set up for small to medium sized models on a recording bench, which this is my just normal workbench, but when recording big models like this are hard to keep in focus. But there we go, a few squirts. This is full coverage here. Just gets rid of some of that greenness and yellowness to get that orange lantern glowing effect that we're going for. Right, once the orange is done, we move on to our red. So we use the Fluor Red Ink and some Fluor Red from Green Stuff World, again a 50-50 mix. And this is where we slightly change how we're doing this. So working from the top to the bottom, I'm now spraying the airbrush so that it kind of catches that top edge and sort of flows over the edges of the rest of the lantern. So you can see the paint coming out of the gun is just going over top of the lantern, and what this does is it creates a dark red at the top, so like a cold part of the glowing effect, but then just catches some of the raised edges that are on the Sky Lantern itself to tone down that orange and to create the reddish hue that you get with a fire glowing effect. And as you can see here, I'm just doing little sprays, letting the paint flow over the tops. We're not catching that bottom edge where it's brightest. After, you can see the ropes are in threes, so the three ropes at the bottom there at the bright points are red mix isn't going over that. And as you can see, the more and more I'm adding, oddly, though it's darkening it down, it's creating a glowing effect for us. The witchcraft of this fluorescent red paint that I use for a lot for like lava effects and that creates a nice heated glowing effect by dulling the colour down. And here I'm now just adding directly at the top where I want it to be more red, just adding a few squirts so that we've got that natural flow very quickly from yellow up to red. And now for our darkest points, we're making a little mix of, this is 3 or 4 drops of Tenebrous Grey and 1 drop of red ink into the airbrush, and we're spraying this directly over the top. So that Tenebrous Grey gives a nice reddish, purplish, black, smoky effect to the top. A bit later on we'll be doing some dry brushing and some stippling of Tenebrous Grey, as well as some Corvus black. There, and this part here, I'm just spraying it directly onto where I want the darkest points, angling the nozzle of the airbrush so that it catches specific edges using the contours of the model as well as the contours of the brush, the airbrush, to give us some different effects. And there you can see within about 15-20 minutes we've got ourselves a really good looking glowing lantern effect, and all that it's kind of missing now is just some wear and tear. Once you've finished this part, give the entire model a really good spray of varnish. I do this a few times. This is AK matte varnish. You can use the AK ultra matte varnish. I give this a few coats because there's quite a lot of shine to it, and I wanted to get rid of the shine. I wanted it to look like the glow is still behind the sort of material of the Sky Lantern, hence why using quite a few coats of matte varnish. So you do a coat, let it dry, and then just once you get rid of that shine, obviously it will glisten here because there's direct light on it. Once you get rid of quite a bit of the shine and you're happy with it, then you can move on, and it also protects it. I'm just going to move on to some dry brushing here of the gold around the top. So moved on to the some of the AK rusty gold. I wanted a very subtle gold on the top because I just thought it would be darker than our bright points, and it would also be quite dirty, quite sooty, quite messy. So I dry brush over the gold areas with AK rusty gold. You could use Balthazar gold from the Citadel range for this. Quite rough. We're going to be adding some weathering to these areas, and of course the gold trim along the top. I do a little bit of dry brushing the gold trim, and then I just resort to using a smaller dry brush to catch some of the other small parts. If you're a bit nervous about using a dry brush, you can brush this paint on and then just maybe put a wash over it of maybe Nuln Oil just to dull it down. So dry brushing can give a slightly darker finish than if you were just to purely brush the paint on. So predominantly the gold that we use on this model is AK rusty gold and AK old gold. I tend not to do too many bright point highlights, as I want to maintain the brightest points to be the lantern and some of the green detailing that we do to make it look like jade. So the gold is very subtle, very dirty. And here I've just grabbed some AK Old Gold, or you could use Retributor Gold from Citadel, and we're just doing some dry brushed highlights with this colour, just on some of those flatter areas, make it a bit brighter, just to pick out some bright points. But like I said, I'll be doing some weathering to this a bit later on. Final highlight, we'll just do a little dry brush of some Stormhost Silver from Citadel. Not too much, just your main edges that would naturally catch the light. And then you can see I've just done the bottom in exactly the same way as I did the top. This next process is very long. We're now going to be painting all of the rope, so I use some AK Grim Brown, or that you would use Citadel Rhinox Hide, and now I just paint all of the ropes that are around the Sky Lantern with this colour. I wet it down quite a bit so that it flows off the brush quite easily, but this is a long process. Obviously we use the airbrush, so it went over all of this with these colours. I wouldn't risk doing this base coat just helps clean it up. It sets the darks against the lights, and it's just it's a necessary evil this stage. It does take a while. Just to note, there's some ropes that join the lantern to the like the basket, I guess you would call it. I haven't attached those yet. They get attached later, but those ropes are painted the exact same way as we're doing here. So it's base coating with Grim Brown or Rhinox Hide. Once you've done that, then grab some AK Saddle Brown, and we're just going to dry brush now very carefully with a small dry brush using the Saddle Brown, and just go directly over the ropes you've just painted, catching those top edges. There's lots of detail on those ropes. It's really easy to dry brush and pick them out and to make it look really good. So just as you can see, it's just simple dry brush, straight down, straight across in one direction, using the saddle brown to pick out the raised parts of the rope. And once you've done all of those, then grab yourself some AK light earth and just with a little bit on the brush, just highlight the ropes where any knots are, any raised areas, any points that you would think would just be a little bit brighter or a bit more worn. Just catch that with the AK light earth just to add some final highlights to the rope. Okay, once that's done, then I apply some transfers, go over them with matte varnish. I also then, using AK Tenebrous Grey and Corvus Black, do some subtle dry brushing and stippling across all of the gold and the lantern itself, just to add some dirt and some smoke. That part's optional. If you want to make it look smoky and dirty, you can do that. Just dry brush it normally as you naturally would, not too much brush on the paint, and do some stippling around the transfers just to help blend them in. Now we're going to be painting the burner, and from DeadlyPrint Studios I bought these little sort of fire pits. I've got 4 of them. I bought loads of them from DeadlyPrint Studios. You can buy their full prints from them, or STLs. I grabbed my little pot of white ink wash, which is 1 part Vallejo ink, 1 part contrast medium, and 2 parts water. And I just made a big batch of that and stuck it into one of the contrast medium pots. And this is our fire source to make the lantern rise. This is where the heat comes from. So it's actually a little bit Bob Ross here, that you won't really see this when the model's built, but we know it's there, and you can just, if you look closely, you can see it. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating, we'd be doing the airbrush again, the same colours we used really to create the heat, the light glowing effect on the lantern. It will create the glowing effect of the fire. So I'm using the white ink wash just to fill in the bright points of where I want to be brightest. So that's in the centre points there of the little lanterns, and just I add some down into the depths of where the base of the flames are, and I follow that process for all 4 of those lanterns that we've got there. We'll then be moving back across to the airbrush just to paint them almost in the same way we painted the glowing effect on the lantern. Obviously this process is completely optional. You don't have to do this. I'll show you how to create a glowing effect within the burner part just after we've done this, and you could just easily just do that. But these little lanterns from DeadlyPrint Studios are even good for just your bases, to add some flavour to some of your bases. Right, grabbing the airbrush, which has got some Vallejo White Ink in it. Once that white ink is dry, it takes about 10-15 minutes. I then just do a few sprays here, just getting some overspray onto those pure white areas, just to create the natural gradients. So from just the top, catching some of those flames, and then I just add some around those central points, so it just adds a natural gradient moving outwards from the pure white to the darker. Once we finish, we'll be dry brushing as well, so it creates a sort of more darker at the top, and the metal work of the frame also gets darkened. The first colour we're going to use is Green Stuff World Fluorescent Orange Yellow. It saves a step. I only use this on some of the fire effects, so just go all over all of your white using this fluorescent orange yellow mix from Green Stuff World. It gives a really good glowing effect straight away. A few squirts is all it takes. It's got really good coverage. I added a couple of drops of water to this just to get it flowing easier, but within a few moments you can paint all four. It doesn't take very long. Once all four are done, grab your fluorescent red from Green Stuff World, and what we're doing here is, as you can see, directly down now from top to bottom, I'm spraying the red so that it covers all of the flame pretty much, and the edges, any edges that stick out get covered in this red, so it gives it a nice darkened effect. A little bit like we did with the lantern with the red, so it's just catching some of the edges, and you can see with a few squirts it creates a really good effect, that the fire's glowing from the bottom, getting cooler at the top. With all four done, grab a really cool paint, which is the AK Wargamers Enamel Fluor Yellow. It's an oil-based paint, but it really glows after a while. So give the bottle a good shake, and just reintroduce the bright points now. So where it was pure yellow, where we painted that white in, just add a few dots of this. Not too much. If you put too much in it, it drives really funny. Just a few dots of this into those bottom points, and it will really make them shine. You could just go back in with the white ink and then cover it with fluorescent yellow, but this saves you half a job. And then whilst we're waiting for that enamel to dry before we do some dry brushing, grab your burner and grab some Evil Sun Scarlet from Citadel. Put it in your airbrush, just grab the Evil Sun Scarlet Air, or if you haven't got any, just thin your normal stuff down with a few drops of thinner. And paint the inside of the burner with this colour. So pure Evil Sun Scarlet in the middle, and then I add a sort of the four corners of the circle. I want to be brighter, so I give the entire inside of the burner a coat of this, and then do sort of intensive spraying just on the four corners, where the sort of the little poles are to join it, north, south, east, west, just to that's where I want little glows to be coming from. So I'll just make those areas a little bit brighter. So you've got a bright point in the middle where the four lanterns will be, and then north, south, east, west will be brighter. So grab your white ink, and we'll just reintroduce the bright points that we're going for here. So you'll see I'll do some sprays straight into the middle, and then some gradient sprays on your north, south, east, west, so that those will be your bright points fading into the red at the end. Over this white ink we will be putting some fluorescent paint. So with the fluorescent orange yellow that we just used on the lanterns, spray this over all of the white, and this will give you a nice glowing effect from inside the burner. Like I said, you don't have to put the lanterns in if you haven't got them. You could just do this to make it look like the burner's heating up. That's creating your heat source for your lantern. I just went that extra step to put some of the small fires in there just to add a bit more character to the model, but the gap is so small that you've really got to look to see them. On the table you wouldn't notice them, it's only when you look up close can you see the fires in there. Right, the lanterns will be dry now, so grab some Tenebrous Grey, and then we're just going to dry brush top to bottom, direct line straight down, so that you're making the top of the flames darker, and you're making the frame of the fire pit itself darker. So darkness means cold on when we're doing heat effects. So the Tenebrous Grey is the darkest you can get, apart from if you go black. So this will just almost repaint your fire pit and all of the framework, plus give some texture and colour to the top to make them look cooler. And just repeat that on all four. next I'm just going to show you how I attach them into the actual fire pit. So what you need to do with these ones is they've got 4 little legs on the bottom. You just snip those legs off, which leaves the round frame, and then all 4 will neatly fit inside of the burner. If you keep the feet on, 4 don't fit, and only 3, and it looked a bit weird with 3 in there. And then just grab some of your instant super glue, because they are resin, and then just pop it inside and it will glue in place and create your sort of little glowing burner. Add just some of that fluorescent yellow just to reintroduce some glowing points, reintroduce it around some edges, and then thinning it down with a little bit of odourless thinners, as I do catch a few areas, and it pulls a little bit. It can look quite nasty if it pulls in certain places too much, and it can look quite garish. This is an optional point. You could just use some fluorescent ink. There's some fluorescent yellow that you used before to do this. The way I'm doing it here just means I've got to get some thinners on the brush just to thin it out a little bit to create some gradients. Again, this part's all a bit hidden, so it's an optional step. I've then attached the burner to the lantern, and I'm just going to be using the same method, the same gold approach, so rusty gold and old gold, just dry brushing those on the outside of the burner, so that it blends in with the gold that we've got. I then do some dry brushings of Tenebrous Grey and Corvus Black to create the sort of weathered, tempered, smoky look that I wanted over the gold. I didn't want it to be too bright. I wanted it to look like it was covered in soot, so it had been heavily used for many years. Corvus Black is a good colour to give a dirty, sooty effect, to stipple it over some metallics, and it makes it look very worn. And once we've just added a bit of that texture with the Corvus black, you see I'm using an old brush and been pretty heavy-handed with it. That's the Sky Lantern pretty much done. We're now going to be moving over to the basket. And I wanted to use some colours that make it stand out but not too much. Again, I didn't want to go too bright and for it to detract from the lantern itself. So for the basket, I'm going to be using some white ink and going to be creating again some natural gradients from that central ridge is the bright point down to the gradient it down to almost black to where I want it to be darker. I pretty much cover all of it in the white, but it still creates the gradient from the very bright points to the dark points. We'll be going over this in with a contrast paint. You could, if you want to, paint this by brush, but I like the effect that the airbrush gives us a very easy natural gradient from dark to light. So the central point where the ridge is the brightest, and then gradient out using a little bit of white, as you can see me doing here. Even that little bit of white where it almost looks black will still catch the paint and give colour, but very dark colour compared to the very bright colour where we've emphasised the edges with the white ink. once that's done, we're going to be using Citadel Magma Drop Flame, a few drops of that, and only one drop of the red ink. The red ink's very, very strong, so this is about 5 drops of the Magma Drop Flame and 1 drop of red ink, and it just takes away some of the orangeness that the Magma Drop Flame has got. It adds a little hint of red to it and thickens it up a little bit as well, just to add some body to the paint. And just go over the whole of the basket with this colour, taking care as you're spraying it on. As soon as that area starts to shine like it has there, move to the next area. So a couple of coats is better than one thick coat that will run and spider. Once you finish doing that, then I just reintroduce the black again, because this was all primed in Vallejo Black Primer. I then use some Army Painter's matte black just to reintroduce the areas we've just overpainted, so any of the trim, the dragons, a bit of the framework, I just reintroduce there with the black, just to give those a flat base colour to work from. I now use AK gunmetal. You can use any of your preferred silvers, lead boucher, iron breaker, and I'm now just going to paint on the trim, which is I use the box art as reference. So it's the metal trim on the top, there's a bit in the middle, and all of the machinery that work the sails. And I just basically go around and base coat all of your silver in AK gunmetal, which is a lovely silver blue. It gives a really good finish straight out of the pot. And then when you add some Nuln Oil over it, which I'm going to be doing shortly, it really adds some good deep silver colour that stands out, that looks a little bit worn, but looks like it's catching the sort of blue of the environment that it's in. The silver's painted, I dry brushed over the workings of the sails. I then apply some Nuln Oil straight out of the pot with a smallish brush so we have some control. Just apply the Nuln Oil all over your silver areas. Whilst that's drying, I grab some AK Old Gold and a really small dry brush from Artify, and there's a little bit of gold trim they've done at the bottom, which is sort of inlaid, so I just use that small dry brush, and using the sort of stand I rotate the model so that the little parts catch the dry brush and just get painted in gold. I also paint the emblem on the front and back as gold. That's a base coat of old gold with some Reichel and Flesh shade, and then I do some highlights with a mix of Stormhole silver and old gold, a 50-50 mix, just to give some highlights. From, you know, when doing metallics, you can do the metallics how you wish to. I'm just showing you how I do mine. We all have our preferred colours and preferred methods, but just always make sure you start with your base coat. Do a wash if you wish to dull it down, and then reintroduce your highlights with the base coat and then your highlight colour with some silver edge highlights. Just remember, obviously on this model I was going for a slightly toned down effect of the metallics, so I don't introduce too many bright points. I didn't want it to detract from the lantern too much. Once the gold is done, I'm just adding in a nice highlight there to the front part of the emblem. Could be moving on to creating some of the jade colours that you see on some of the transfers, but I wanted to have that across larger parts of the model. So I start with AK Emerald Green, and then I move to AK Mint Green, and then I move to AK Ice Yellow, mixed with the Mint Green. But first of all, base coat anything that you want to be jade in the Emerald Green. So I choose the dragons that are on the front, which they actually paint as gold. I'm doing those as jade, and I'm also going to be doing the dragon that's on the top of the sail, the head and its tail that goes across the top of the sail. I paint those in this colour also, plus some small points across the entire of the model on the sort of little gantry bit that sits underneath. I paint some of those features in these colours. So you base coat in the emerald green, and then we do our first highlight with the mint green, and then we do a 50-50 mix of mint green and ice yellow as our final highlight of the brightest points for any areas you want to do, and that gives us a nice jade effect on our model. So yeah, I've done So the dragon's on the front here, the dragon's on the wing assembly, and on the bomb rack I also paint the trim that they've painted as gold, I think, or silver. I've painted that as jade. A hint with the bomb rack is you can build it completely separately and not glue it onto the model. It can be a complete separate sub-assembly, and then you can just clip it on and clip it off quite easily. Okay, with your jade done, we're now going to do some highlights of the basket, and for this I just grabbed some AK light rust, which is almost like a squig orange, I think you could use from Citadel. And what I do here is I do an edge highlight of the basket, of all the edges, and then I also do some battle damage, which is in the usual way, where I do slightly thicker edge highlights and add some scratches and some larger splodges of it where the paint has chipped away. And then once I've done that, I fill in those areas. I don't use black, I use the grim brown just to fill those spots in, to make it look like underneath is wood. It's not metal, it's actually wood that this is made out of. So I imagine if there's dents and scratches, that the colour underneath would be the dark wood. Yeah, take your time on this, add as much or as little battle damage as you want. Add some water to that, to your paint, just so it flows off the brush nicely, and just catch your edges, and then add some dents and scratches, as many as you see fit, or just do straightforward edge highlighting if you don't want to do the battle damage with this colour. Of the grim brown, and now I just go around and fill in all of the areas where I put the battle damage on, making sure to leave some of that light rust colour showing so that it sort of highlights the dent or the scratch. For the wood inside, I grab a largish dry brush here, sort of medium size. I dry brush all of the wood with grim brown, and then do a dry brush on top with mud brown, and then a further dry brush on top of that with the AK light earth. So you could use any Citadel brown colours for this, maybe a Rhinox hide followed with a Steel Legion drab, or like a Xandri dust with a final highlight of any sort of light dusty colour like Ushabti bone, something like that. Doesn't have to be anything special here, because it's going to get covered by the lantern, and there's going to be about 6 figures stood on it. So this is just to get some paint on it to give it some colour and texture. And the next step, what you'll see is that I would have actually painted the jade of the wing assembly. The wood of the wing assembly is painted in the same way: grim brown, mud brown, light earth, just doing edge highlights. I then dry brushed the sails with a little bit of AK anthracite blue, so any dark greys just dry brushing, and applied a couple of transfers onto the wings. So that's the only extra steps I did there, is just painting the jade of the dragons on the assemblies, and then do some light dry brushing on the wings with dark greys. And then once you've done that, you can just stick it together. So I stuck the lantern on top of the assembly, and then we can dry brush any remaining areas on the metallics. So here's the bomb rack that I've painted, like I said, with the jade, exactly the same processes. So for the jade, use the same colours that we did. On the bombs themselves, just use the grim brown and saddle brown, like for the ropes, and the same with this little gantry part. So the metallics, the jades, the ropes, all painted the same ways that we've done everything previously on the lantern, to keep the colours consistent through the entire model. Obviously in the description I've covered off how each of the parts are painted. I'm just covering off now how I painted the little gnome on the bottom. This is a Blood Bowl gnome from the new Blood Bowl team. I thought it had a little bit of fun to the bottom of it, like he was clinging on for his dear life. There's no conversions here. The model literally gets built and it looks like he's gripping onto that hook at the bottom. So I paint his main jacket and hat in blue, which is Oxford blue, highlighted with some Ducat blue, which would sort of be your sort of Cantor blue, and a light blue from Citadel. You could paint them in any colours. Obviously, this is completely optional. This part, the leather on him is leather brown from AK and saddle brown. The flesh is Kislev flesh, Reikland flesh shade, and some Pallid Witch flesh to highlight. And then his beard is just a series of oranges getting brighter and brighter. So I use medium rust, deep orange, light rust, and pastel peach, all from AK, to give a really nice bright ginger red feel for the beard. But you can use any of the Citadel range to give those, and if they're oranges, I just find those 4 colours just give a really nice orange effect. Again, this guy is completely optional. If you've got a Blood Bowl team hanging around, I was lucky enough to get sent this Blood Bowl team, so I've got lots of spares, but you might be able to find him cheap on eBay, or you can just skip this step. But this next section, just real time, shows you how I painted the little gnome dude. Right, with him painted, I'm just going to show you then sort of how the model gets back together again. So you glue that part to the bottom of the basket. I've then attached the 4 ropes. I kept them completely separate. I then glued them on and then just painted them as we painted all the other ropes: grim brown, saddle brown, light earth, with a little bit of the silver on the clips at the bottom. So that's that part together. The bomb rack can now just clip in. The rope assembly just slips over the frame and then just clicks in nice and neatly, so you can take it on or off. I don't think Games Workshop didn't note that in the instructions. They said to glue it, but you don't have to. And then, as you can see, it's so massive, this model. I don't stick the gantry part is stuck on, but the base itself, the flying stand, is not stuck in. It just is no glue on that, so you can take it on or off. And there's the model. That's about 14 inches tall, so the model just on its own is about the size of a knight. On the base it stands 2-3 inches taller than a knight. This next part is optional. This is the clouds that show on the base of my one. You can get these from DeadlyPrint Studios. You can buy the STLs or you can buy the physical products. And to get my cloud effects, I base coated the entire cloud itself with Deep Sea Blue by AK. I then add some lighter greys, starting with grey blue, where this is the sort of mid-tone of the cloud. I looked at images of cloud online, and the clouds, if you were flying over them, the clouds can appear dark at the bottom, light at the top. And that's the effect I'm trying to go for here, where we've got the deep sea blue is the darkest point, the grey blue is your mid-tones, and then the blue grey, silver grey and white that we'll be adding at the very end are your brightest points. So using the airbrush, I just pick out where I want to be lighter, catching some of the edges, some sprays on some of the bright points. I do thin this paint down, so it's about 5 drops of paint to 1 drop of thinner, just to get some, so it flows nicely out of the airbrush. And once we're done with that, we then grab the blue grey, and I work this from only on subtle areas from the bottom, the parts that stick out the most, but it's mostly done from the top of the cloud downwards, so that the top of the cloud is brighter. grab a large dry brush and with the Vallejo Silver Grey, dry brush this across the top of the model. I applied some ultra matte varnish over the tops of these as well, just to protect it a bit and to dull down the shine that was being created. So yeah, just dry brush the top sections with the silver grey, and then once I've done that, I then apply a dry brush of pure white over those areas, not too much, just to make those look like the brightest points. The very tips of the clouds are the brightest points. Of course, those parts were all optional. If you didn't do that, you could just glue the stand to the base, and that's the Sky Lantern all painted up. The figures will be covered off perhaps in another tutorial. I'm going to paint them, but I'm not painting them just yet. And there we can see the Sky Lantern in all its glory. I hope you've enjoyed this painting tutorial. I hope it's given you inspiration to do the same thing on your model as well as other models. All of these effects and processes can be used across any model range. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, like, comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your feedback, and everything that you guys say means a lot to me. Contact me if you've got any ideas of any other models you'd like painted on the channel. And as always, happy painting.